Hi everyone, my name is Matt Garrity, and I've recently made the switch from Maya 2016 with the Mental Ray renderer to Maya 2017 with the Arnold renderer. And I kind of want to use this interior room scene that I modeled over here and there over the last couple of weeks to go over some things that I've noticed were a major change between the two rendering systems in Maya. One thing I want to talk about is lighting. I'm going to touch upon HDR lights and how that's different. I'm going to talk about even the point or spot lights and how there's a rollout for those lights in Arnold that's going to be a little bit different than what you're used to. I'm also going to talk about materials. The AI standard material is kind of a dual material. Kind of go over some of the options with that. And then I'm going to talk about rendering. And I know there's an Arnold setting in render settings that kind of talk about, let's see, the sampling and also the ray depth. Those are the two major ones that you're going to have to consider when doing your render. So I want to show you what kind of playing with those settings, how that can affect your render time and render quality. So given that, let's start talking about lighting. So the first thing you're going to want to do after you model your room is to bring in some natural light. We're going to do that with the AI Sky Dome light within the Arnold tab, Lights, and Sky Dome light. You can see if I turn off my window glass layer, I have a scene out there. What that is an actual HDR image, and there's a sun up here that's bringing in some light through the windows, and that's going to start lighting up our scene. So given that, let's turn that back off. So this is my glass material right here. It looks like it's blocking our view, but it's actually not. So let me go to my perspective view and show you what we have here. I'm going to go to my perspective view. There is my cabin in the woods. Isn't it pretty? So I'm going to zoom out and you're going to see that this is actually a sky dome. And there's the HDR image mapped to it. And this is what's lighting our scene initially. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to go here and I am just going to delete it. We're going to start over. So I am going to do just what I told you before. We're going to go into the Arnold tab, Lights, Sky Dome light. So there's our sphere. You can zoom out there, you can see it. And go to my attribute editor. Here it is, my AI Sky Dome light shape. And then we're going to add into the color attribute a file node. And we're going to attach that HDR image. And this is my source images folder for my project. And here is some textures that were free. Sierra Madre B, let's see, ref. This is the HDR image right here. Now what Arnold's going to do, or what Maya's going to do for Arnold, is create a TX file. And apparently what I've learned is TX files are more efficient for Arnold to handle. So Arnold or Maya by default is set up to automatically create these TX files. So it should just replace what I've already created here, but we'll go ahead and do that anyway. So I'll just open up my HDR file. So it's a 32-bit image. And there it is. I'm going to turn off filtering for now. And I'm going to zoom out. You're going to see it's a little different. I'll show you why later. But there we go. So now based on that, I already know, because I've created this light before, I want this AI Sky Dome light. There it is in my outliner. I'm going to want to set this rotate in the y-axis a -60, just because that's the way I like the light. There's the sun. So here's the sun. There's the window. It's going to come right through. So based on that, I'm going to show you something here. Let's go back to our perspective render cam view. I am going to turn off our glass layer. This looks like it did before. And I'm going to do a quick render, so it's probably going to take a little over a minute, so I'm going to pause the video and come back and show you. So okay, here's our first IPR render. You can see it's not that impressive. What we're getting here is obviously it's very dark and there's a lot of noise, and whoops, we don't see anything out our window. We can kind of see the log sticking out and some of the inside of the roof outside, but that's about it. But I've noticed, at least with this image and whatever image that you import to light up your scene, you may find it a little different. If you go into the attribute editor, AI Sky Dome Light Shape, you can change the intensity of this. And off the top of my head, I can't remember what I set this to. You have two settings that you can play with here, the intensity and the exposure. Intensity is not as sensitive as the exposure is. And you have another setting called samples. Samples, at least to start off, I like to give it sample level of about 2. This just gives a little bit more detail. Oh, I still have IPR on. Let me pause that and let's play around with another setting here. Your intensity, let's see what happens if we give it a intensity of, I don't know, let's try 10. And let's turn off our pause. Start this up again. Let's see what we get. Alright, we're starting to get a little bit more light here. So this is starting to look a little bit better. I'm going to pause it again. And one other thing that we have to play around with here is the resolution, and that also contributes to the noise. This is probably pretty low. I'm going to bring over my source images folder, and there is a, let's see, if you just get information, where is it here? On the HDR, let's get information on this image here. You can see the dimensions are 1600 by 800. So the 1600 is the width, 800 is the height. So you're going to want to set your resolution to 1600, which is the maximum dimension of your image. That'll help decrease the noise a little bit. And so let's do this again. Let's turn off the pause and see what we get. Okay, not bad. So here's our scene. It's definitely lit by the HDR image, which is attached to our AI Sky Dome light. Obviously we have some noise issue, but we can solve that later. This is a quick render. That actually only took 49 seconds. But we definitely have an issue with not being able to see our environment outside. We want to see that. So the way we get that to happen is by going to our render settings. And it's on my other screen here. Bring that over. In the Arnold Renderer tab, come down to the environment rollout. There's a background setting. Click on the checkerboard, and we're going to create a sky shader. And this is going to be what we use to see our environment. Plug in a file node here, and then hopefully when you downloaded your HDR image, it should come with an 8-bit version of it. And this is something that you just want a regular image plugged in rather than an HDR image that has so much detail. It's just going to bog down your scene, and it probably won't look correct either. So I'm just going to plug in the JPEG that came with this Sierra Madre image set that I downloaded. I'm going to plug that in, and this is going to do the same thing as the HDR. It's going to create a TX file. You're not going to see it yet, but once I do a render, that's when that will happen. Okay, so I just did another test render, and everything turned out okay. We can see that we've got our scene in the background, our environment, and it's being lit. It looks like it matches up with what we're getting here. There's our sun up here, and it's casting a light. Looks like it matches up. So not bad. Alright, I'm happy with what our AI Sky Dome light is doing as far as our interior scene lighting. and our AI sky node is actually doing for just creating that visible environment in the background. So staying with our lighting topic, I just want to quickly hit upon the interior lights and how that's a little bit different in Arnold than it is in Mental Ray. So obviously we have our one exterior HDR light lighting our scene, but we want to warm up this scene a little bit. This is a nice cabin, maybe in the Adirondacks or something like that. So we want to light this up and make it a nice cozy place. Uh, and what I've already done here, and I've had this off for just the exterior lighting experiment. I'm going to turn the lights and lamps layer on, and this is where I have the interior lights. And what I've done already, just to save time, is to render that out, and just to show, and obviously this is quick in a low render setting, um, what that brings to our scene. So it's kind of neat to go from a lights off to a lights on environment, and how that changes our feel of the room here. But what I really want to touch on is the say how Arnold renderer changes even something as simple as a spotlight. What I've used here is just a Maya point light, and if I go to the attribute editor, you can and go to the shape node. We've got our color setting here and our intensity here, but then if you go a little bit further down, you can see that there's an Arnold rollout, and there's a lot more control you have over that one spotlight just in this Arnold rollout. So the intensity still stays controlling the light intensity here in the attribute, main attribute. But Arnold, if you click this use color temperature, it overrides that. And also exposure would, I believe it squares whatever you have here as far as intensity. Samples is your detail, how much detail that light casts. So if there's a little noise, it may have something to do with that one specific light samples. And then there's a radius of your light. So this kind of controls the size of your light bulb. One thing I want to touch on is if you have this normalized checked, that if it's checked, there is no relationship between the size and intensity of your light source. So if it's unchecked and you make this light really big, then you're going to get a much more intense light. So I just wanted to create this, if I move this out of the way, I just wanted to create this light large, so I have a little bit more control over it. I can move it around a little bit, but no matter what size I make it, it's not going to make it any brighter. Now the other lights on my interior that are lighting up the scene, besides the point lights, are these Arnold specific lights. These are called photometric lights. Now these lights, what you do to them, you plug in or what's called IES files. And what IES files are specific files made by the say like a light bulb manufacturer. In this case these are floodlights and spotlights, but all these instances are different IES files. And Arnold uses what are called photometric lights. You can access these by going in the Arnold tab, lights, and down here are the Maya specific lights, and up here are all of the Arnold specific lights. And what I have there are what's called a photometric light. So that's what these are, and what I've done is it's looking for an IES file, which I've plugged in here, and you can also give it color and intensity. Right now I'm overriding this color, and I'm using a color temperature, which is similar to my point lights. So maybe it's a halogen or an incandescent temperature. These are also emitting diffuse and specular. I have 2 samples. I've just left the exposure at 1, so I'm just controlling it through the intensity as far as how strong it's going to be. And the reason for those, I just wanted to play around with them a little bit and see what the effect was, but I wanted to kind of cast some kind of a specific photorealistic light on the fireplace and on the walls. I'm really not, and maybe it's just the file that I've plugged in there. I was just playing around with them just to see what the effects are. But I probably can get away with just a spotlight in their place, and I might even get a little bit more, better result. I'm thinking maybe it would, light up the inside of the canisters I have here and in here. They're really not lighting the inside of my scene. Maybe I can push them back a little bit more and see what they do. But basically, what I wanted to show you is just the difference between the fact that there are Maya lights as well as Arnold specific lights. So in this first video, giving a quick overview of Arnold rendering in Maya 2017, we talked about how we can light up our interior scene using a AI sky dome light, which we plugged in an HDR image, a 32-bit image, and that brought in some light from the outside. Then we talked about how we added the visual scene to the background by going into our render settings and our environment tab under the Arnold render tab and plugging in an 8-bit version of that image. And then we rotated those spheres to be the same angle. The next thing we talked about was a couple different light styles, how we lit up the interior of our scene. We used Maya point lights and the lamps there, and also we talked about specifically these photometric lights and how we plugged in IES files to those.